Never mind the noise and the chatter. We are here for intelligent, fact-based conversation on Season 2 of Bergen Banter. Welcome to the official podcast of Bergen Community College. I am Dr. Larry Levanka, your host of podcast for the state's largest community college. And again, Season 2. So we got renewed for a second season. Today's topic, keeping the faith. It's a story about resurrection, in a sense, talking about Christianity, religion, and a decades-long decline in the number of the faithful that seems to be rebounding. So we have Professor Clemens Reinke here. Yes, that's German. And he is here to talk about that decline, where Christianity has been in the country, where it may be going in the country, why it's going in a certain direction, and where other religions fall too. Clemens, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
All right. So let's start right there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of research out there now that says Christianity, people identifying as Christians, was on the decline for a long time, and now it has either stabilized or even started to come back up. Is that the truth? Is that what's happening in the country?
Yeah, so I think we have to see that in a little bit more detail. Certainly clear what you said, that there has been a long decline, not just for the last 10 years, but I would say that the decline started in the 90s, in the 1990s. So it's almost 30 years of a decline. And from the statistics that I've seen so far, that still holds true for mainline denominations, for those who were the large, big religious organizations back in the 50s and 60s.
Protestants, Catholics,
right, exactly. And those numbers really started taking a hit in the 90s, beginning with the 90s.
So what we know that 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago, religion was far more rooted in American culture. What did it look like in the 1900s? How many people were identifying as Christian in the United States?
Right. So that's actually a very interesting history too, because I think the rise and decline of faith and belief and Christianity has gone up and down throughout the history in the United States, actually. I don't know if you're aware of the Great Awakenings, the first Great Awakening, second Great Awakening, and the third one. Each time there was a Great Awakening, the faith abounded in the country, and people flocked to churches, and then there was always following kind of a decline of it and more secularization and people kind of doing their own thing until the next big awakening comes.
Is there a typical impetus for an awakening of religion? Is it something that happens in the social sphere? Is it something that happens, a war, etc.? What would inspire an awakening of religious affiliation?
I would think that has two different answers. On the one hand, I think that the pandemic certainly has something to do with the fact that people are looking for community again after having been shut down and also having lost direction a little bit in terms of their lives. The numbers also indicate that the biggest growth right now is among millennial and Gen Z men, which is surprising because that's the great number of people that had been mostly gone from the church in general. And that could be connected with a search for meaning, a search for belonging, and also have a little bit more direction in terms of what is right and what is wrong. I think that's one of the things that has led to that. But the question is also where the growth actually occurs. It does not occur in the mainline denominations. They are still continuing to go down. Even within the Roman Catholic, maybe a little bit more now. The Roman Catholics have often been able to keep their members a little bit better, although there has been a general decline as well.
And a shift in demographic too,
right?
From, again, 100 years ago, 150 years ago to where we are now.
Right, exactly. So it seems like that the more evangelical churches or Christian nationalism is more attractive to Gen Z and millennial men.
So how are people being gripped, or I won't say, how are they learning about the church or a church or religion or God? Is it social media? Is it word of mouth? I mean, are they actually going to church, or are they just saying that they're practicing because of something that they may have read on the internet?
So that's an interesting question too. I was specifically thinking right now of 3 young men that were in one of my introduction to religion class. They definitely had expressed certain Christian ideas. I did not have the impression that they actually attend church. They were just talking about certain Christian ideals that were more connected with certain morality or certain standards that are coming more from the evangelical or even Christian nationalist direction.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's not the young man who was baptized and made his communion and confirmation and tithes every week. It sounds like to me it's more about what they've seen on Instagram and have been taken in by it, or are interested by it and found direction with it.
Yes, and I think that also goes along with think about 30 years. That's a generation, right? Mm-hmm. In the 50s, families went to church, right? Families used to go to church with the mom and the dad, and the family then, of course, naturally would bring their children to the baptismal font, raise them in Sunday school, bring them to confirmation, and all of that. That started to break down a bit during the 60s, when church became more like the establishment, and in the 60s, of course, everything, especially
counterculture,
young generation was trying to go against some of that, and they rejected church in some ways that way as well. Although that generation still would come back to church when they have their own families.
Which is interesting in its own right, right? That they were, but I guess part of growing up maybe is they felt like they needed to mature, and part of that was, all right, you got the house, you got the picket fence, you got to go to church, you got to get your communion, all that. I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. It was, it was an opposition to what the parents brought in, which may for some people be like a golden era, but for other people also a lot of problems there, right? Mm-hmm. Gender inequality, LGBTQ issues, and all of those kinds of things that were kept under the carpet, and that's kind of brought about the counterculture, right? So that's how at that point young families were less connected to church than they used to be. Now that generation found it even less important to bring their children back to church. And the generations that we see now, millennials and Gen Z, are the ones who actually have very little experience with church, because their parents no longer felt that it was important actually to take them to church. Not that they opposed the church, but I've heard an interesting report also on NPR about that religion is more obsolete. It's not that it's wrong or not that it's not important, but in this society it's more obsolete. Like maybe an old telephone on the rotary thing it's not bad. It can still function, right? But nobody uses it anymore today.
So it sounds like it's almost more or at least the rebound that we're seeing in Christians in the United States may not be necessarily about the church, but more about the concept of what makes a moral life or what makes a just life. Do you think there's something to that?
Sorry.
That's quite all right.
Yes, I think there is something to it. I also think along with that actually is a certain biblical illiteracy that, for example, when I'm thinking about those 3 young men that were in my class, they did not really know any biblical stories, or probably could not even have told me what Jesus was preaching, or even pointed to anything specific in Scripture that is that they would base their beliefs on.
I think
they identified with it, and in some ways had basically the ideas that they, you potentially through social media and other ways, that that they were taught what Christianity is supposed to be, something that biblically one could probably actually critique.
So then it's not. We have an American Pope, right? The church has an American Pope now. You wouldn't argue then that because there is an American Pope, more Americans are saying, I'm interested, I want to become religious. It seems like it's much more surface level than some deep-seated belief in becoming faithful. Do I have that right?
Yes, I think so. And I think also there's a very important other aspect to that, and that is how in the most recent years, religion and politics have mixed with each other. In some ways, that can go all the way back to the pre-Civil War era, actually, where there was a division in religion as well between churches that were for the abolishment of slavery and churches that used the Bible to, justify slavery. And there was a big debate, especially the southern churches were the ones who kind of tried to use the Bible to justify slavery. And in the north, you had more churches that, said that is wrong based on their belief as well, right? So the idea of family values actually was brought back into it already then, and this is something that I've read in Bradley Onishi's book here on Preparing for War. It's a wonderful book actually that talks about the development of Christian nationalism and the marriage of Christianity with politics. Right, exactly. And the family values thing originally came out by saying that that the family is is ordained by God, and that slaves are part of the family. And any slave is actually like a child that needs to be taken care of, who could never, even as an adult, become self-sufficient or their own person, but they would always have to be under the care of the family, and that will be a God-given or God-called kind of situation.
And framing it in such a way that it's almost benevolent of the master in that scenario. Right?
Exactly. It's a wonderful thing that the master is taking care of this entire family that includes the slaves in the field.
Well, that brings up an interesting point then. The fact that, I think a lot of us would have the opinion that there's been this confluence, intersection, whatever you want to say, of politics and religion in recent times, but it's not the case at all from what you're saying.
No, I think that actually goes all the way back to the very foundation of this country, actually. Of course, in the Reconstruction era, there was a little bit of a back and forth about these kinds of things, but it remained that way. Of course, in the Third Great Awakening, it was more about social justice, and it was more about making sure that everybody gets included. But then there is a backlash to that again. In the earliest parts, even in the 60s, as the counterculture was coming up, you also have coming up Billy Graham and some of the other movements that were trying to bring Christianity back into the life of people. And interesting, the story of Brad Onishi is he grew up as a teenager in Orange County, California. He is actually half Asian, I think Japanese he is, and the other, and then white. And he belonged to his family moved out of Los Angeles into Orange County, California. And it became, the Orange County at that time was like the place where most white people would escape to, because they didn't want to be in the mix of all the multicultural kind of situation in Los Angeles. And so many big churches actually started growing up in Orange County. And so and there were even important things where that separation, starting actually with the 1945 decision of Brown versus Board of Education, where especially in the South, many churches advocated for people to leave their public schools and to found church-based schools, so that most of a lot of Christians at that point withdrew their children from public education to put them into church-sponsored schools, and they were very much divided by race.
So the intersection then of church and state, although it sounds like a part of our bedrock in the country, is a myth. I mean,
yes, I think it has been maybe not a myth, but maybe it's an aspiration, at least for some. Or maybe it's also misunderstood in some ways. Many people might see it as not the separation of church and state for the possibility of people to freely live out their faith, but more like, okay, we don't need faith. It's only secular society, right? But the connection in the South with the building of church-based schools, private schools, so that especially for white people, they don't have to mix with children of African American heritage. That started out there, and then you have, for example, during the 1950s, I have this here, there was a podcast actually by Dan Miller that was named My Straight White American Jesus.
So much for inclusivity and protecting all people, right?
Exactly.
So the point that we're making here, and the point that you're making here, is that the rise in Christianity, or the stabilization in Christianity that we're seeing, is driven by white young men who are searching for meaning, belongingness, etc., but who are also tying all of that to religion and politics and making it into what is commonly known now as Christian nationalism. Now, fundamentally, I suppose you could say many things about that, but is that specifically what is driving the rebound in Christianity in the United States?
I think so, because you can see in the statistics again that the mainline churches are not the ones who are gaining. They continue to be on decline. It is the evangelical churches that begin to grow. You see a little bit of an uptick, for example, in the Southern Baptist churches.
Okay.
But I have not seen any statistics with the main lines, with the Methodists, the Lutherans, the Episcopalians, even Roman Catholics and so on, that they would have gained anything. So
what does that mean then? If it's not right, if it's not the church, right, in the traditional sense, and it's just people identifying at this surface level, is it really a rebound in Christianity, or is it something else?
I think it's something else, especially, and I don't want to discount that some people truly find faith and belief and so on, because again, the idea that the connection of politics and so on doesn't necessarily drive somebody to come to faith. Mm-hmm. But the question is what it is that they're being taught. Mm-hmm. They're not really taught social justice, for example, the way that maybe a mainline church would do, or something that would be called a liberal church.
Right.
Liberal churches might be motivated by helping the poor, reaching out, including people, finding social justice, that everybody is equal. That is not necessarily what is driving this. This is more within the culture war that we have right now, that Christian nationalism finds itself very much connected. It's almost like the same thing as the politics in that direction. And that gives very specific It gives a home for people. It gives maybe a place where people feel comfortable because now they are being seen. They're not getting lost in in the big mosaic of all the variety of diversity, and that I think is attractive to a lot of people, especially young people who have to find their place in life still.
So then who benefits, right? Then it's the political party that benefits rather than, a specific church. And I think that is maybe different than what we would traditionally associate with being faithful or being religious. We would associate that with enriching the lives of the church or, the faithful. But I mean, we're talking a lot about Christianity. Are other religions seeing something similar, or is this a uniquely Christian phenomenon right now that we're seeing the interconnection of politics and faith and people looking for belongingness, et cetera? Is this unique to Christianity, or are Muslims seeing it and Jews, et cetera?
That's a good question. On the one hand, of course, other faiths are slightly growing in the United States, but not because it suddenly becomes more attractive, but because people from other places in the world have been coming to the United States in greater numbers. And therefore culturally bring their religions with them and find within their own religious communities some of the cultural connections that they know from home, right? So, for example, that big new mandir that was built near Princeton, that's the second largest Hindu temple in the world, the largest one in the United States, and it has a lot of attraction. And that's because a lot of people with Hindu beliefs and Hindu faith have come to the United States, and so it's growing, right? Same thing is true with Islam, although in Islam, of course, just like in Christianity, Christianity and Islam are the two religions that are actually evangelical in the sense of trying to reach other people and convert them. Most religions don't do that. Right. I mean, Jewish people don't go out to try to convert others, nor do Hindus, nor do Buddhists. They practice their belief, and it becomes attractive to some of the Westerners that might come and join that as well. But those faiths are more there to practice what they have, where they came from, and more centers are here because the number of Buddhists are increasing not through conversion, but through, immigration and being attractive to people that maybe some Westerners also. But in Islam, I think there is also the movement to make sure that to keep especially the young people faithful to the Muslim faith, because they're coming from Muslim countries where everybody is Muslim, and therefore it's easy, young people would grow up automatically within Islam. But if the families are moving to the United States, they find themselves in a different culture, in a culture that's dominated by Christianity. And so it's easy for young Muslim men and women to acculturate to Western culture. And so the mosques that I know are very, they have a drive to make sure to kind of teach Islam to their own children, to make sure that they don't trail off. And so I think there are some pretty good examples, like the Islamic Center of Passaic County in Patterson, that has really seen a lot of growth. They started out in Patterson. They have another site now in Clifton and have grown quite a bit. And a lot of young people are going to those mosques.
But I mean, I think coming back to the sort of original conversation, does that move the needle? I mean, do we see a period again in this country where you have a majority of people identifying as religious instead of, whether it's agnostic or atheist or whatever? Is that in the future, or is it probably these incremental gains and losses and maybe surface level interest in some of the concepts of religion rather than full-fledged faithfulness?
Yeah, I think there is actually a hunger for some kind of belief, actually. because of the fact that over the generations, taking your children to church has become less and less important. We have a lot of young people today that really have no idea what it's all about. Again, in my religion courses here at Bergen Community College, I noticed that also, that young people, even if they identify Christian culturally, really don't know what that actually is. And they learn a tremendous part of when we come to the part in our Religions of the World course, when we talk about Christianity, and afterwards they're saying, wow, I never knew any of this. So it's interesting that, and they have one assignment always, that is for people to make a site visit to a religious site that is not in their own background, to kind of experience and observe what that is like, and then write about their observations and their feelings and so on. And I've seen that more and more of the students, and I started teaching here 11 years ago. It really has come more in the last few years that a lot of people are saying, yes, I grew up Christian, but I've never really been to a church. I've never known anything about it. So can I go to a church because I want to actually see what this is about that my family used to talk about.
Very interesting. I mean, it just, look, you hear about people referencing God in whatever denomination that they've practiced or they may have familiarity. But it seems like so much in this conversation today has not identified anyone as the holy rollers, right? If that term and that phrase means anything, but people lacking or not having access to education, whether it was because of their families or just because their living situation, whatever. But it seems like there's a lot of learning that can go on at all levels here, regardless of who we're talking about. You think that's right?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. At the end of my courses, I always have a final learning statement. And that's a wonderful thing to read, what students got out of the course. And that's one of the things that they feel excited about, having learned something about what they felt they should have known, especially when it's coming to people that have not had the chance to practice their own religion because they have never grown up in it.
And that's part of religious enlightenment, right? When you actually learn what makes a religion tick rather than what you may see on the internet. So is there an opportunity to get back to that place where those who identify as religious or faithful are identifying that way because it is rooted in what that religion is supposed to practice and preach rather than, what somebody saw on a social media post?
Yeah, and I think actually that's exactly where the things come back together that I just said earlier, right? Where that somehow religion had become obsolete, which may also be connected with a misunderstanding of the separation of church and state. That for many young people, church and faith has just become some kind of aspect of life that's not the most important. That's kind of not important or valid. Valid, yes, but not like important for life. One of the several students actually responded to my final learning statement that having gone through learning about 11 different religions, they have come to realize how much religion and culture and daily life are actually connected. That our religious beliefs, even if they're totally undefined, because I would almost say that everybody has some kind of belief. Science may be fine. Science may answer a lot of different things, but science does not answer what happens when we die, or what is the purpose for us to be here, or where do we ultimately come from? Those are still deeply religious questions that science cannot answer.
And those are really interesting questions that people can get into, right?
Yes.
And that can lead to its own awakening.
Exactly. And then they're realizing how much society and life is actually wrapped around what people believe about these things.
Mm-hmm. And no one's going to know, neither you nor I, So we fill the gaps with things like religion to give us hope, right?
Yes.
That after we die, that there is something and that it's not just nothingness. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I think that's why many people do identify as religious or faithful, because you want there to be something bigger than yourself.
Exactly.
Right?
You want to have some kind of an answer for that, and maybe some assurance also that what happens after life.
Mm. So where do we go from here? Do you think that we will continue to see the traditional faiths sort of bounce around, in the 30%, 40% of the country? Or do you think that there is a great awakening? Perhaps you can't project that because we don't know where we're headed, but what do you foresee the future as religion and those identifying as faithful in the United States?
I think it would be great to have some opportunities for religious literacy education. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily in a way that you try to bring people to convert to your faith. Mm-hmm. But if people could actually have more opportunities to learn about religion and belief systems outside of having to make a commitment right away to it.
Almost religious shopping.
Yeah, in some ways, but also to learn about all these different things, right? That would actually help people to learn more and make actually informed choices,
rather than an Instagram post. Which
right.
We all know you can get anything in an Instagram post, and you can get anything to appear in your feed if you've hit the right algorithm. So,
yeah.
Great conversation today, Professor. Really enjoyed it on religion and keeping the faith in the United States. We'll sure to have you back maybe down the road when we talk about religion again.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I enjoyed that very much too. Thank you.
So thank you. And again, this is Bergen Banter, the official podcast of Bergen Community College. Never mind the noise and the chatter. We are here for intelligent, fact-based conversation, and we will see you again down the road.